I'm just trying to get a sense from, because you're close to the Iranian regime, I want to get a sense of whether...
What does that mean exactly? I'm close to the Iranian regime. Is that how you introduce academics from your own country?
No. In the way that I know that I'm close in terms of having easy access to and contact with and conversations with members of the cabinet. That's all I meant. I didn't mean...
Would you call them the regime?
Well,
would you say it like the... Have you ever been to Iran?
No, but there's lots of countries I haven't been to that I know about, hear about, read about, speak to.
It's not an apartheid state. No, it's not an apartheid state.
Women are dragged off the street for not wearing the veil?
No, that's not true at all.
It is true.
Well, you can say it's true, but that doesn't make it a fact.
I think most people listening know that it is true.
I live in Iran. Many journalists come to Iran. Hezbollah, you consider as a terrorist organization, right?
In part.
No. In part?
Yeah.
What does that mean? Is it a terrorist organization?
In part.
Is it a terrorist
in the same way that the
organization?
Republican movement in Northern Ireland was in part
No, in the same way that your
and in part
government is a
political.
terrorist organization in part. Your government is a terrorist organization.
Is that your view?
That doesn't make sense.
Is that your
Either
view?
you're a terrorist or you're not.
The latest round of protests, they seem to be pretty intense and pretty persistent, up to and including this latest tweet from or post from the US president. What do you say is going on there? What do you say those protests are about?
Well, there are two issues here. One is that because of the U.S. sanctions and European sanctions, basically because of Iran's policy against Israel,
What is Iran's policy against Israel?
Yes, because
what is it?
The whole sanction. Iran's position?
Against Israel, yeah.
Yeah, Iran says that Israel is an apartheid state. It is not morally legitimate, and that Palestinians have the right to return, just like apartheid South Africa.
That it shouldn't
and
exist.
And back then,
that it shouldn't exist. It's not. Is that
no?
What you mean?
As an apartheid entity, no.
But
apartheid should not exist anyway. When your government was
I'm just trying to get a sense from, because you're close to the Iranian regime, I want to get a sense of whether...
What does that mean exactly? I'm close to the Iranian regime. Is that how you introduce academics from your own country?
No. In the way that I know that I'm close in terms of having easy access to and contact with and conversations with members of the cabinet. That's all I meant. I didn't mean...
Would you call them the regime?
Well,
would you say it like the...
Do you want to go into that?
Yeah, sure. Well, what's the question?
Well, have there been regular democratic elections that...
No, you were talking about Israel.
Oh, okay, we'll go back
Iran's
to that.
position on Israel?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get a sense of whether
Iran's position on Israel is identical to its position on apartheid South Africa. When your government was supporting the supremacist regime in South Africa, the Iranians were supporting the ANC and Nelson Mandela.
Yeah.
The same logic applies to Palestine.
Right. So it's not the existence of Israel, it's the nature of this Israeli state. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly.
That Iran's supposed to.
The state could be called... Yeah, the state could be called Palestine, it could be called Israel, it could be called Walt Disney, but as an apartheid state for Iran, this is not acceptable.
And isn't Iran something of an apartheid state, particularly if you're a woman?
Have you ever been to Iran?
No, but there's lots of countries I haven't been to that I know about, hear about, read about, speak to.
It's not an apartheid state. No, it's not an apartheid
Women are dragged off the street for not wearing the veil?
No, that's not true at all.
It is true.
Well, you can say it's true, but that doesn't make it a fact.
I think most people listening know that it is true.
I live in Iran. Many journalists come to Iran. Journalists that you can invite, Jewish journalist Max Blumenthal from the Gray Zone, invite him on your show. And he's been to Iran just recently for a couple of weeks. He went to different cities on his own with his wife, who's also a journalist. Ask him if any women have been dragged off the streets anywhere that he's been to.
So you're denying that the Iranian government forces women to wear the veil, the hijab?
Well, veil is one thing.
I know it is. That's why I corrected myself. And those that don't want to...
You mean the headscarf?
The headscarf.
The headscarf.
And those that don't want to cover their hair, it's trouble for them, isn't it?
No, nothing happens to them. No, nothing happens to them. And some of my students on campus, in classrooms on campus, they don't wear headscarves. So I think your understanding.
But is your I'm just trying to get a sense, is your assertion that in Iran, in the last decade, and even more recently than that, not a single woman, particularly a protesting young woman, has been detained and in one case died in custody with wounds from beating because she had her hair short?
No,
You don't believe
You're
that
talking
happened?
No. Mahsa Amini had no wounds. There is no footage. There is footage of her, and in the footage, there is nothing that shows that she was beaten. She had a precondition. Yes, she was taken in, but she was not beaten for her dress. There is a law in Iran about a dress code, because whether you like it or not, they believe that the way in which the West promotes women is sexualization, commodification, objectification. So they'll have their own cultural boundaries, whether you agree with it or not.
Well, you've said to
whether
me.
You agree,
Okay,
whether
I
you
understand.
agree with it or not,
Yeah.
it doesn't. That's one thing. But women being dragged off the streets in Tehran, I've never seen that happen myself.
No, but
this
that
is like
doesn't
when
mean it
they keep
hasn't
saying
happened, does it?
gays in Iran are executed. I've never seen a gay person in Iran executed.
But
this is sort
that doesn't
of the
mean it's
myth
never
that-
happened. Does it?
No.
Just because you haven't seen a woman being dragged off the streets doesn't mean it hasn't happened.
No,
I'm not saying
it's never happened.
And you are wrong
Like
to
in
say,
London,
if I can just
but like
say,
in
you
London,
are wrong
if
to
you
say
hold-
that Mahsa Amini had no injuries. She had physical injuries, including a skull fracture and brain edema.
No, she didn't. No.
Well, an independent
No, that's
medical
not-
analysis and a UN fact-finding mission determined that she did.
There was no UN fact-finding mission in Iran. Where are you getting this information? What was the name of the UN fact-finding mission team? The name of the person who did this?
I don't have that in front of me, but I can find
Yeah,
it
of
for
course.
you. But
You
you
can-
can
you
say
get
that
it
about
from
any
these-
statement that I make.
No, but the thing
And I
is
could
that
do
you
it
get
back
this.
to you.
No, because you can't, because the point is that you have to give me names. If I say in the UK, people are being arrested for saying no to genocide, for having a billboard in their hands, no to genocide, they're being arrested for that. I have to show footage of it happening. And I have to show the law saying that this is how it's done. And when you tell me that if you tell me, has a woman ever been dragged away? I'll say yes. If you say that have people been beaten on the streets by the police, I'd say yes. In protests and riots, it happens. Well, if you tell me innocent people have died in Iran in prisons, I'd say probably yes.
Well, it's interesting.
But when you tell, and I would say the same about your country as well. And I would say the same about your country. But in your country and in the West, the caricature of Iran is very far from reality. And the reason is because of your country's hatred for Iran, which has been ongoing for 45 years. If Iran was so deeply despised, then it should have collapsed by now, so long ago.
But when you say, you ask
and
me,
then your government and your media is concerned about human rights in Iran, where you support Israel, not you, I mean your government, you support Israel, you help Israel in Gaza, you have the flights that go overhead.
We support the rights of Iranians as well. We support the rights of Iranians.
No, you don't. You actually are a country that tries to harm Iranians because you impose sanctions on ordinary Iranians. The maximum pressure sanctions. Do you think the maximum pressure sanctions hurt a government minister?
You know the reasons.
They're intended
the
to
reasons
make ordinary people suffer.
You might not like it, but you know the reasons for that. I mean, can I just come back to you on one thing?
What are the reasons? Because since I don't like it, you should tell me. What are the reasons for the sanctions?
The reasons include the proxy terrorist activity that's been, I would argue, I'm sure you are going to disagree with me, but the proxy terrorist activity that Iran has been involved in for decades.
What are these
Hezbollah,
who are these
Hamas, others arming
Hezbollah
Syria.
So Hezbollah you consider as a terrorist organization, right?
In part.
No. In part?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well,
is it a terrorist organization?
In part.
Is it a terrorist
in the same way that the
organization or not?
Republican movement in Northern Ireland was in part
No, in the same way
terroristic
that
and
your
in part
government is a
political.
terrorist organization in part. Your
Well,
government is a
that's
terrorist
it.
organization.
Is that
Well,
your view?
That doesn't make sense.
Is that your
Either
view?
you're a terrorist or you're not.
No, organizations can be partly terroristic and partly political. You know that.
Just for your information, Hezbollah was created out of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. It was a creation of the occupation. Just like the ANC was a terrorist organization and Nelson Mandela was a terrorist according to your government standards at the time. Hezbollah was created when the Israelis invaded Lebanon and took Beirut.
But you do know, surely, as an academic, that organisations can be terroristic and political and have wings which are both, and social as well. The Republican movement in Ireland certainly did.
So you're saying that the political wing of Hezbollah is not a terrorist organization?
It has connections to a terrorist organization, yeah, but it operates on different levels.
So it's not a terrorist organization?
In part, it is.
Look, I know you don't want to answer the question. From our perspective, Hezbollah is a national liberation organization that has recovered the South Lebanon and saved Lebanon from Israeli occupation and colonization. And Hezbollah's sin is that it supports the Palestinian people. Hezbollah has been resisting the Israeli regime, and it opposes the regime and the ethnic cleansing and the genocide. Your government, your media supports the genocide. You like Israel, you like what they do, and you consider them to be in your camp. Obviously, we have huge differences because Hezbollah has not carried out mass slaughter, and Israel has. And your government supports despots, countries that have zero elections, but they're not regimes.
But Hezbollah did carry out mass firing of missiles into Israel as well, just to report a fact back at you.
Israel invaded Lebanon multiple times. It took Beirut, and Israel bombs intentionally apartment blocks in Lebanon. Just today, it destroyed houses in southern Lebanon. Almost every day it carries out assassinations.
I'm just making the point that the fire isn't just in one direction.
You're proving a point. You're proving a point that the Israeli regime, which carries out murder and slaughter, is normal, and it is not a terrorist organization. But Hezbollah, when it responds with far less fire capability and without killing all these civilians as the Israelis do, they are the terrorists. Or partially terrorists.
And
that standard of yours, and it's not just you, it's your country, it's your government, it's the entire Western political establishment, is the problem. It is the problem in our region.
And a problem
because you are choosing despots and you are choosing regimes that carry out ethnic cleansing as your allies because they serve your interests.
In round 2, because this was not just a continuation of the first interview. This was a complete structural demolition of the way Western media operates when it thinks nobody is going to push back hard enough to matter. And Professor Marandi pushed back so hard and so precisely that by the end of that interview, the reporter was not just losing the debate. She was visibly exposed as someone who had been confidently repeating things she could not actually prove. Let us start with the most devastating moment, and the one that every person watching needs to fully appreciate. The Massa Amini exchange. The reporter came in hot. Skull fracture, brain edema, UN fact-finding mission, independent medical analysis. She said all of it with the confident, authoritative tone that Western journalists use when they want to signal that the facts are settled and the guests should just accept them. And then Marandi did the one thing she was completely unprepared for. He asked for the name. Just the name. Who conducted this UN fact-finding mission? What was it called? Who led it? Give me the specific source you were citing with that level of confidence on international television. And she had nothing. Absolutely nothing. She said, I do not have that in front of me, but I can find it for you. That is not journalism. That is vibes dressed up as facts. And the audience watching that exchange, including people who had never questioned the Western narrative on Iran, got to watch in real time what happens when someone demands the same standard of evidence from a Western reporter that Western reporters demand from everyone else. The silence was the story. The fumbling was the headline. And Marandi did not even have to celebrate it because the audience could see it clearly enough on their own. Now let us talk about the close to the regime framing. Because the way the reporter introduced Marandi tells you everything about how these interviews are designed before they even begin. She said she wanted to speak to him because he is close to the Iranian regime. Marandi stopped her immediately. What does that mean exactly? Is that how you introduce academics from your own country? And the reporter scrambled to explain that she meant he had access to cabinet members, which is a completely normal thing for an academic expert to have in any country. But she had already used the word regime, which is not a neutral descriptor. It is a loaded political label that prejudges the legitimacy of the Iranian government before a single question has been asked. Marandi called that out not aggressively but clinically, and it landed because he was right. You do not refer to the British government as the regime. You do not call the American administration the regime. The word is reserved specifically for governments that Western foreign policy has decided to delegitimize. And using it as the opening frame of an interview about Iran is not neutral journalism. It is narrative setting masquerading as neutral journalism. The clowns running these newsrooms do this so automatically and so constantly that they do not even notice they are doing it anymore. Marandi noticed, and he made sure the audience noticed too. The apartheid comparison deserves its own full analysis, because it is the argument that the reporter had absolutely no answer for, and it is the one that most directly exposes the double standard at the heart of Western coverage of this conflict. Marandi's position on Israel is not that Jewish people should not exist, or that the country should be destroyed. His position, stated clearly and repeatedly, is that an apartheid state should not exist in the same way that apartheid South Africa should not have existed. And he pointed out something that the reporter could not refute. When apartheid South Africa existed, Iran was supporting the ANC and Nelson Mandela, while Western governments were either supporting or tolerating the apartheid regime. The same Western governments and media establishments that now lecture Iran about human rights were on the wrong side of that history. Mandela was literally listed as a terrorist by the United States government until 2008. If you apply the standard consistently, if you say that an apartheid state has no right to exist in that form, then the Iranian position on Israel is not radical extremism. It is the application of a principle that the entire Western world now claims to endorse in retrospect about South Africa. The reporter had no response to this because there is no response that does not expose the inconsistency of the framework she was operating within. And then there is the Hezbollah in part moment, which Marandi absolutely pounced on, and which deserves to be appreciated for how surgically it was handled. The reporter said Hezbollah is in part a terrorist organization. Marandi immediately asked what that means. Is it a terrorist organization or is it not? She said in part. He said that does not make sense. Either you are a terrorist or you are not. And then he delivered the trap that she walked straight into. The Republican movement in Northern Ireland used political violence for decades, by the definition being applied to Hezbollah that would make them, in part, a terrorist organization. Western governments directly and indirectly supported or negotiated with the IRA throughout the conflict. Does that make those governments, in part, sponsors of terrorism? The reporter had no clean answer because the answer exposes that the terrorist label is applied selectively based on geopolitical alignment, rather than consistent moral principle. Organizations that fight for causes the West supports are freedom fighters or national liberation movements. Organizations that fight for causes that threaten Western interests or allied governments are terrorists. Marandi knows this history. He grew up watching it play out. And he is not going to sit in a Western television studio and pretend the standard is being applied consistently when the entire historical record proves that it is not. The sanctions point is the one that should make every person who claims to care about human rights genuinely uncomfortable. Western governments impose maximum pressure sanctions on Iran, explicitly designed according to their own architects to cause economic pain severe enough to generate domestic political pressure. That means deliberately making ordinary Iranian people's lives harder. Deliberately raising the cost of food, medicine, basic goods. Deliberately targeting the civilian economy of a country of 90 million people to create suffering that might eventually produce political change. And then those same governments turn around and say, they are deeply concerned about the human rights of the Iranian people. You cannot impose maximum pressure sanctions designed to cause civilian suffering and simultaneously claim the moral authority to lecture anyone about how much you care about the people living under those sanctions. Marandi called that out directly, and the reporter's response was essentially to pivot to proxy terrorism accusations, which is exactly what people do when they do not have an answer to the question that was just asked. Here's what this interview ultimately proves about where we are right now with Western media and Western foreign policy framing. The entire architecture of how these conversations are supposed to go depends on the guest accepting certain assumptions as given. Iran is the regime. Hezbollah is a terrorist organization. Masa Amini was beaten to death. The protests reflect popular opposition to the state. These are presented not as claims requiring evidence, but as established facts that reasonable people accept before the conversation begins. And what Marandi did across both of these interviews was refuse to accept a single one of those assumptions without evidence. He asked for names, he asked for sources. He asked for the same standard of proof that the reporter would demand from him. And when she could not provide it, and the confidence turned out to be a performance rather than a foundation, the entire framework collapsed in real time on international television. The world is watching these collapses. Not just this one. Every time a Western journalist walks into an interview with a narrative and walks out having been dismantled by someone who actually knows the history, a clip gets made. That clip gets shared. Millions of people who were previously consuming the narrative uncritically get to see what happens when it gets tested. That is not propaganda. That is accountability. And it is happening more and more because the gap between what Western governments and media say and what is actually documented and provable has gotten so wide that any reasonably well-informed academic with a decent internet connection can expose it on live television without even raising their voice. Lucas Speaks exists to make sure those moments reach the people who need to see them. Hit that like button, share this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because we are just getting started and we are not stopping.